Today we're talking about the fun and exciting sign of Leo, which always begins around July 22nd of each year and completes around August 22nd of each year. And Leo, out of all the signs of the Zodiac, is the one that is most associated with life and the ego and the sun, because the sun is the planet, or at least we call the sun the planet, that rules the sign of Leo. And if you really think about the sun is the center of our solar system, and if we didn't have the sun, we wouldn't have any warmth or heat or beautiful gold color each day as we move through it. And that's very much what Leo is about. It's about shining and bright and optimistic and positive and passionate and heroic energy. Literally, Leo is the solar hero. And people who are born with either the sun sign in the sign of Leo or many, many planets in the sign of Leo, or at the time of day when they might have been fortunate enough to have the constellation of Leo to greet them as a rising sign at the ascendant when they were born, are people whose whole life is about living and whose whole life is about finding the life force and searching for it and experiencing it to its fullest. And they're a lot of fun as a result of this. There's not one Leo that I've ever known that didn't have at least a small sense of humor, because Leo is the sign that's associated with humor and good faith and trust. And one thing about Leo people, being that they are fixed signs, and fixed signs can be very, very faithful and committed, is that once you have a Leo as a friend for you, you have a friend for life, as long as you respect them. That's one thing that's very, very true about Leo. I think it's inherent in every single one of their lives. There's almost as if there's this memory of having some type of royalty in their lines at some point in the timeline of their history. And as long as they're treated with respect, and as long as you're truthful with them and expect truth back, they will be your friends. They're there when you need them, perhaps sometimes too much, because one of the things, being the generous sign that they are, is that they do give a lot. And one of the lessons in their life that they have to learn is about how to set limits with those that they love. Leo will always spoil their children, and their children always expect to be spoiled more. And yet, they have a hard time saying no, because it's just basically a very generous sign of the Zodiac. It's associated with the heart. Heart is representative of love, and when we say heart, we really mean the heart chakra. There's about 100,000 different points in the body that are what we call energy points and chakras. There's 7 main points, and they run up and down the spine. And the largest chakra of the body, that is literally the grand central station, crossing point for all the other power points of the body, is the heart. And so for that reason, Leos particularly, or people who have a strong sun placed in the horoscope, are people that in the life have to learn to work with their heart, to exercise properly. And you always hear the phrase, affairs of the heart. Love is always associated with the symbol of the heart, and love is something that they really are all about. And they're very, very good at giving love. But one thing that's very, very difficult for Leo, which is another lesson that they need to learn, is about receiving it back, allowing people to give back to you. And so when they're upset or the affairs of the heart aren't treating them right, this can be very, very difficult for them emotionally, and it can also be addedly dangerous in that the heart will be very much affected by the emotional life that they move through. The other thing that's associated with Leo is, of course, since we look at the sun, and the sun is bright gold and yellow, is the metal gold, which was always associated with kings and queens of days gone by. And it's interesting about the metal gold, because Leos do love gold. They usually love to wear it. And if they're not wearing it, they have it stashed somewhere. And there's many people have joked around about it, but it's very interesting. Leos love gold because they will love to look at their reflections in the gold. There's something about them that's very proud and very, very egotistical at times. It's very charming. And they do have a strong ego. And this is part of what they're about, is that they have the ability to make things happen as a result of the strength of their personality. And a lot of people, when you talk about the word ego, say, gee, ego is a pretty negative thing. And it is true. Sometimes a Leo can be very, very overbearing. They can, if they haven't set any effective limits with themselves, be very egotistical. And many people have the definition of ego as being a negative thing, but a very, very good friend and acquaintance of mine, Sherry Culliver, who's a minister for Unity Churches, had said something about ego quite recently to me, which I thought was very profound. And basically what her definition of ego was, it was positive, was that ego is the motivation. and the feat that you have to put under the motivation to make it a reality or make it happen. And this is something that Leo has beaucoup, Leo have an incredible amount of energy in them, so they can make things happen if they truly, truly believe in them, and if they believe that it's ethical and right and just. The sun rules Leo, and it's interesting, the original 7 planets that were seen in the sky, each day of the week was named by each one of those planets. The sun's day is the day Sunday, and it's very interesting. If you look at Sundays, generally speaking, that's a day of rest. People go play. They try to take some time off, kind of like the lion basking in the sun. And it's a very effective day in which to get married. Many people these days have the fashion of being married on Saturdays to make it convenient for the out-of-town relatives. But it's not always a wise day to get married on, because Saturday is Saturn's day, and Saturn is the planet of hard work. Sunday is the day of life and fun and joy and ongoing life. So it's usually a better day to choose for celebrations. And it's usually a day of high energy. My recall quite often is that there have been many Sundays that literally are sunny days. So I think it's quite profound when you think about them. The typical symbol for Leo is the cat, the lion, anything that is in the feline family. And I bring that up because each sign of the zodiac has its particular physical qualities and characteristics. Now, particularly if you have Leo rising, in other words, born at the time of day when Leo was on the horizon, you might look like a cat, like a lion. A Leo will oftentimes look like that. Usually the first thing you'll notice that they oftentimes will have a high forehead. High forehead, and if you really want to have an example of a very extreme example, Queen Elizabeth Rex, the Virgin Queen from ancient times in England, a very, very high forehead to the point of hardly having any hair. She was truly a Leo. And usually there's accompanying that the mane of hair that goes with that. Their hair seems to be a very big issue for them. They like it full. They spend a lot of time worrying about it, tossing it around. The other thing you'll also notice with Leos lots of times are those sparkly eyes that are sort of slanted and almost look like cat's eyes, many times with a little bit of green thrown into the browns or the darks or the blues. And the other thing you'll notice, too, about them is that the body, generally speaking, unless there's a lot of other influences in the horoscope, tends to be somewhat rectangular. They're not ones for having much of a waist. They're usually very athletic, and this is very important for them because they are what we call a fire sign, and they do rule the heart, and they really do need to keep exercising and keep themselves active and keep that life force running through them. The one thing about a Leo, when they enter the room, you pretty much know who they are because they're the ones that within about 5 minutes will have collected a crowd of onlookers to give them the information that they need to give them, and in the process have fun doing it. Basically, what we're looking at are big kids at heart. This is the group of people who can get down on the floor with the little kids and be just as effectively a big kid as the little kids, and who really never quite grows up. That's something about Leo, is they never quite grow up. And as a result of that, there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of positive issues, but a couple of the deepest issues in the life and the deepest searches in the life are, number one, there's always a very deep need in the life of a Leo to find their own creative center, because if this is the sign of abundance and it happens at the time of the year when the fruit is on the tree and when the river is running freely, they can walk out and not worry about where the food and the fruit is coming from because they have the abundance around them. So their issue in life is to take what's there and make it even better and create with it. The other issue is the deep search and the need to search for the Father, the search for the Holy Grail, the search for the Father who is the Father that birthed us, or actually God the Father, because again, there's a very strong association between Leo and the sun, which in many, many ancient cultures was associated with God. And we need to talk about that. The Hopi Indians say that the sun is the holder of the way. In other words, the being that holds life in its hand and moves it through time. The sign of Leo is the force of love and light, like the warmth and the light of the sun. There's many myths and stories associated with the Leo. One of the myths in Egypt. In fact, Egypt was very much aware, in fact, you see it a lot in their hieroglyphics of the flying sun, of the sun god. They called their sun god Ra in Egypt, where he wore an eagle head by day and a ram's head by night. The Egyptians believed, as have many cultures in history, The Egyptians believed that their pharaohs were direct descendants of the sun, as did the Japanese. The Japanese Empire of the Sun, until quite recently, believed that all their emperors were descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu Omikami. And so we see this consistent life force running through all the cultures that we know of at this point in time. There's many, many stories in the Greek mythologies. They're very rich with mythologies and stories of the sun. But there's a whole series of gods: Apollo, Phaethon, Phaethon, and Helios, which literally in Greek translates to the word sun, who are all considered to be sun gods. If you look at Apollo really is the golden child. He's the prototype. He's the archetype of the golden child. He's Zeus's son. He's one of a set of twins. His sister is Artemis, and she and Apollo both always remain single and independent, and they never marry. But Apollo is beautiful, and the women love him, and he has golden hair, and he has the golden lyre, which plays beautiful music. And his whole life, if you really hear all and read all the stories about him, is about really totally experiencing creativity to the maximum ability or opportunity and taking it beyond. Eventually what happens in the ancient cultures is the temple at Delphi becomes Apollo's oracle. And that's an interesting concept, because if Apollo is a golden child and his whole life is about totally creating and totally connecting with God, it would follow that Delphi would become his temple and the oracle, because the oracle of Delphi was the place that all the kings would go in ancient Greece to talk to the priestess and get a concept of what was coming. And the oracle was always right, and there was an ability to connect with God and get the information. And the information would come as a result of Apollo being at that temple and connecting with his Lord God. He's literally a model, a perfect child. And that's quite interesting, because when you look at Leo people, or people who have a lot of Leo in the chart, they especially when they're young children, they are the model child. And that in itself has its difficulties, because you're always expected to be perfect, and Apollo is always perfect. There's not really much that you can say that is imperfect. And in a way, he's sort of, if you really think about it, he can be kind of a boring character too, because all he's doing is being perfect. There's no balancing in his life. But the bottom line, if we look at him, is that he serves his father, and he also acts as a teacher to some of the lesser gods. One of his brothers is the little trickster Hermes, or Mercury, who in the stories is born in the middle of the night. And in that same night, as Apollo is sitting out in the fields watching the stars and playing beautiful music for the sheep, his brother Hermes comes and steals the sheep away from him and tricks him. And Apollo's not paying much attention. He's not paying much attention. And when it's too late, he finds out what's going on. And that's the other side of sun gods or golden children, is that because life can be sometimes so perfect, they may not always pay attention. And part of this is becoming conscious and being aware all of the time. Now, if you look at the other two sun gods, Phaethon and Helios, Phaethon is the son of Helios. He's kind of the adolescent in training chariot of the sun god. And basically what happens in the stories is that his father Helios each morning takes his chariot of 4 wild horses and drags the sun up into the sky into the midday and places it there, and then slowly descends as into sunset and brings the sun back down so that the moon can rise. And one day, the son of Helios, Phaethon, who's again the adolescent who thinks he knows it all but doesn't quite know it all, decides to do it for his father. And he takes the wild and crazy 4 horses out of the barn or the stall, and he hooks them onto the chariot, and he decides he's going to raise the sun that day. Well, the horses, of course, get way beyond his control. And of course, what happens in the stories is he's trying to raise the sun, he falls into the sea, which again is a testament to the negative side that we can sometimes see with Leo, is this fact that they may not be ready, but they assume they can because the ego may be overbearing or too strong. The other contrast to that is Helios, his father, has learned, has studied, does know his craft, and so he never ever, even though the horses are wild, he never falls into the sea. There's another wonderful story too, about a young girl whose name was Atalanta, Atalanta. And it's a good story because she really doesn't have a mother figure in this story. She's very, very close to her father and very devoted to her father. And she has many, many skills, and she's very, very bright, and she's full of life, much like the sign of Leo. And one of the greatest talents that she has is that she can run faster than anybody else can. And basically the way the story goes is the time comes, as it used to do so often in those days, for her to marry. And it's time for her to meet her match. And the father finally makes an arrangement that she should marry someone. And she, of course, is fighting it because she's full of life, and she wants to be able to basically do her own thing, and yet she loves her father and she's devoted to him. Again, the whole issue of the father and being loyal to the father. And she says okay on one condition, that the young man that she marries will, of course, beat her in a foot race. And of course, she well knows that she's probably one of the fastest runners of all, and so she keeps doing it. She probably can avoid marriage and yet live up to her father's request at the same time. So basically what happens is all the young men come from afar to race her, and of course she consistently keeps beating them and beating them and beating them. And one day she's out and about without it being in a foot race, and she's doing who knows what, harvesting or gathering flowers or whatever. And she, by accident, runs into a young man who she unknowingly is the next young man that she's about to race. And she runs into this young man, and there's something that happens between the two of them, some chemistry, some spark, love, life force. And it passes, the energy passes between them. And he well knows that this is Atalanta. She has no idea who he is. And so they part, and she goes on her way, and he wants to marry this woman. He's very much in love with this woman. So he goes to the goddess Venus, and he asks for her help. And Venus, of course, was the goddess who always helped you in issues and affairs of the heart. And Venus's fruit, which is a love fruit, is the apple. And she gives him 3 golden apples. And it's interesting, gold, because gold, again, is associated with the sign of Leo. And basically, he knows he cannot beat her. But she says, this is what you do. When she's running, you just, at the right time, throw an apple in front of her, and it'll stall her a while so you can get in front of her, then throw another one. And basically, this is the strategy that they devise. So the next day, the race comes, and he's armed with his 3 golden apples in his pocket. And they look at each other, and they have an exchange of glances, because she knows this is the young man that she was attracted to the day before. And of course, he knows who she is. And the race begins. And they're racing, and of course, Atalanta is out in front. And just at the right time, he reaches into his pocket and he throws a golden apple in her way, and she's struck by the beauty of the gold. Remember how Leos just love their gold, and she reaches down and she figures, well, I can reach down and get this gold apple and I'll still beat him. Okay, and now he's way in front of her. He's far ahead of her. And they race again, and now she's moving in front of him. And again, he throws out another one of the golden apples, and she again reaches down, knowing full well that she can always beat him in the race, and picks it up, and he goes far ahead of her again. Then just at the last part of the race, as they both can see the finish line, they're not too far from the finish line, and she again is way ahead of him. He reaches into his pocket for the last golden apple, and he throws it in front of her path. Now, this is a little different situation, because she knows if she picks this apple up, that he will go across the finish line, win the race, and that he will be able to marry her. And yet she knows if she doesn't reach down to pick it up and she goes across the finish line, that she may not be able to, she can't, because of her ego perhaps, or her will or whatever, say that, I'm going to marry this man because he didn't beat her. So what does she do when he throws that last golden apple? She thinks, and she stops, and she reaches down and she picks up the last golden apple. And of course, he moves across the finish line. And the whole point of that story is that in the story, she does choose love. And this is very, very true of Leo people. In the end, regardless of what the situation is or whatever, they do choose love. They opt for love, because this is the whole basic part of their nature. And that's a rather positive story about pride and love, I guess, because she's very proud about her gifts. And this is one thing that Leos are they're very proud about their gifts and proud about who they are. And they really don't have many problems with self-worth. This is something that's inherent in their nature. There's a more prominent story that we hear all the time. I mean, it's heard in all cultures, and it's the story of Hercules, the solar hero. And Hercules literally is the embodiment of the sign of Leo as he moves through his 12 labors cast upon him by Hera, Zeus's wife. Now, a little background. Hercules is the child of Zeus, of course, the god of bounty and philosophy. And Hercules' mother is Alcmene, who happens to be the wisest woman alive. And he is therefore the representation of prosperity and wisdom, God's light. The story of Hercules represents the pursuit and attainment of Christ consciousness. And again, we said a little earlier about how we're the eternal search for the Father. Well, Leos will search for their fathers, physical fathers who birthed them. But there's also, especially when you think about solar heroes or knights or whatever, there's this need to be with God and to be part of God's life and God's hand and God's destiny. And so Hercules, being the representation of all this, represents Christ consciousness as he eventually becomes immune to all the negative thoughts in all the 12 labors that are put upon him. The confusions and the discords that Hercules experiences during these trials never, ever, ever deter him from his path. And that's something that's very, very true about Leos. Once they decide that this is their path and that this is their life force and their life path, they go for it and they never stop. The story that I'm reminded of that's associated with Leo, particularly Hercules has 12 labors, is the story of how he overcomes the Nemean lion, appropriate since the lion is the symbol for Leo. And a little background on this lion. This is a pretty negative lion. This is a lion that's eating all kinds of people and really harassing the population, and people can't really send their children out to play because they don't know if their children will come home, and it's a rather awful beast. And the uniqueness of this lion is that in all his ferocity, he has a hide, a skin that is impenetrable. In other words, you can't really kill him with an arrow or a gun. In those days, they didn't have guns or spears, because his hide is just it makes you invulnerable. And so the way to kill him and to overcome him is to really do it with your bare hands, which is really an act of will or an act of force. And it's in the symbology, what we see in this image, we particularly see the slaying of the selfish self as he annihilates the fierce enemy of the land and the people. And this is part of the struggles of Leo too, is the annihilation or the getting rid of the selfish self, always having to put that aside to go with your purest purpose. So basically what happens in the story, as Hercules tries to hit the lion with all the arrows and tries different positions and keeps failing, he realizes that's not going to work. So what he has to do is he has to go towards the lion with his physical body and take a hold of the lion's neck before the lion takes a hold of him and strangle him with his bare hands. And this is really the only way to achieve the labor. And it's very dangerous because obviously the Nemean lion does not have a real good reputation of giving people back their lives. So basically the way the story goes, he does achieve that. And he's then instantly able to, he's supposed to bring the hide back to the king that puts him upon the labor. And he doesn't want to go against his request from the king that has sent him on this labor. And so he basically gets the hide off the lion, and it's a big hide, and he puts it on his back, and he goes to see the king who's put him onto this labor. And of course, the king thinks that this lion's coming to eat him because he doesn't really see very well, and tells him to go away. And in the end, basically what happens, the misunderstanding is cleared up, and the king says, okay, you can have that hide. And if you look at all the pictures or the photographs or the constellations of Hercules, you always see him with a lion's skin around him. And it turns out that this lion skin ends up being a protective shield for him in all his other labors, along with the club that he holds, which he has also used with the lion. And so there's something about this story, and it's also an interesting story because it's also associated with the tarot. In the tarot cards, there's one card that's called the card of strength. It's in the traditional deck. You see a lion, and you see a woman standing next to the lion, opening up this lion's mouth, who has these huge teeth. And the entire definition of that card is, because it's the strength card, is a steel hand with a velvet glove approach. In other words, to think before one acts and to be strong and have the will and the foundation, but do it in a gentle way. And this is very, very definitely also associated with the sign of Leo, is that they're very strong and what they believe in they do. But basically, there's a gentleness about their spirit that continues.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you like what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.